Right. Welcome everybody to our second in our E-rate training webinar series. Today we're going to go over the Form 470. We have Alec Johnson from EdTech Strategies who's going to do a walkthrough for us and add any other useful information that he has. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Alec.
Oh, thank you so much, Kate, and thank you to MBLC for making this possible. Before we get too far into today's training, want to just have a couple of quick notes. First, we are experimenting with a different training format this year than we've used in the last 2 years. So we're doing shorter and more frequent training. So we did a training last week on sort of the pre-470 steps that you would want to undertake. We're going to try and do more shorter and more frequent trainings going forward. And we would love your feedback on what you think of this approach as opposed to our more consolidated approach that we've used in the last couple of years. So all of the information in the slides should be accurate as of 2 days ago, but things are changing all the time. Excuse me. Most of the updates that you're going to find in your best source for those updates is going to be the SLD's news brief, which comes out once a month. And you could subscribe to that on the link that's included in the slide. USAC also has a series of basic training videos and webinars and whatnot that are available at their Learn page, which is available at the second link that's there on the slide. In addition, on the E-rate listserv that is run by MBLC, we try to put useful information for Massachusetts libraries in particular up on a somewhat regular basis. We try not to flood your inbox with information, but if you're not subscribed to that, please go ahead and subscribe to that so that you can get that information. As always, your questions are welcome, and we will take those questions at the end of the presentation. Our goal is to make this as useful as possible to you, and so your questions play a key role in making that happen. The information that I'm presenting is going to be great, and maybe you won't have any questions, but hopefully you do have some questions, and we'll take those at the end. If you just go ahead and note the slide number, if there's a specific slide that you have a question about, that's very helpful. And once we finish the main session and turn off the recording, I'll stick around for the Q&A for as long as necessary. So before we get into the 470 itself, I want to go ahead and provide a little bit of information about the FCC meeting that happened yesterday. The two big things that were addressed in this FCC meeting yesterday were the hotspots, the loanable hotspots, and school bus Wi-Fi. And the FCC basically removed both of those from the eligible services list for 2026. They also indicated that they will not be funding the 2025 funding requests for hotspots and school bus Wi-Fi. Now, the school bus Wi-Fi obviously doesn't impact the library community tremendously, but the non-funding of hotspots for both 2025 and looking forward for 2026 may have an impact on the library community. There's also some question as to what will happen with Fund Year 2024 funding commitments and requests for school bus Wi-Fi. It looks like those are going to get funded, and they're not going to be clawing that funding back, but nothing is for certain at this point. They did release the orders covering this earlier today, and so I'll report out to the listserv once I've had a chance to review those orders in more detail. So that ends our updates. Let's go ahead and get into the meat of today's discussion, which is going to be the Form 470. The Form 470 is the first form in the E-rate process, and it really starts the official procurement cycle under the E-rate program. Like all of the forms in E-rate, you're going to file this through the E-rate Productivity Center, or EPIC, which is located on the website portal.usac.org. That actually ends up redirecting you to EPC, but that's an easier to remember URL, so that's what I tend to use. We talked about some of the exceptions that are available for services where you don't need to file a Form 470, but just as a general rule, a Form 470 is going to be required for almost all services that you want to purchase through the E-rate program. The Form 470 is somewhat unique in that it can include both Category 1 and Category 2 services on the same Form 470, and we're going to demonstrate that today. And it's demonstrated in the slides that you can walk through included in today's presentation, which was previously distributed. Any services that you might want to purchase under the E-rate program must be covered under a Form 470 or fall into the very narrow exceptions. Otherwise, they are not eligible for discounts. And this includes services that otherwise would be eligible. So, for example, your internet connectivity at your library is definitely a service that's eligible for E-rate discounts. But if you don't file a Form 470 and jump through the necessary procurement-related hoops associated with that service, there's no way that that service will be eligible to get funding. So it's absolutely critical that you include all of the possible services that you're interested in receiving E-rate discounts on in your Form 470. And you can file multiple Forms 470 if you want to. We're just going to do a single Form 470 today, but if you want to have multiple Forms 470 out there, you can certainly do that as well. We talked in more detail about the exceptions during the last presentation, but I just want to remind you there are 3 exceptions for when a library does not need to file a Form 470 under the E-rate program in Massachusetts. The first is the CABIO Category 1 exemption, which is the commercially available broadband internet offering. Remember, that is when you have a service that provides at least 100 megabits per second download in costs less than $3,600 a year in total. So as I mentioned during the last training, in most cases, that's going to be stuff like Verizon's Fios service or Comcast's Xfinity service. If you can get it for a total cost of less than $300 a month, then that service can be exempted from the need to file a Form 470. There are a bunch of caveats to that. You can't, for example, average it across all of the libraries in your library system. Again, we covered that in a little more detail in last week's training, and if you have questions about it, we'll go ahead and take those at the end. Second, there's what's called the Tribal Libraries Category 2 exemption, and despite the name, this is not something that only applies to tribal libraries, it applies to all libraries. And it's very similar to the CABIO exemption in that as long as the Category 2 equipment or services that you're purchasing for a single library location do not exceed $3,600 a year in cost, then you can bypass the Form 470. Now, this is something that only applies to libraries. It's something that some of our school brethren would love to have, but do not. And if you look at materials that are aimed primarily at schools, they'll usually leave this out. So it's something to just keep in mind as a special opportunity that's available for libraries. And the last exception is when you're using a state master contract where the state has filed their own Form 470. And so this is the case for telecommunication services in Massachusetts. There is a state master contract that's out there. I believe it's ITT 72, if I'm remembering correctly. We have a guide for how to apply for services under that exception and under that state master contract available on MBLC's website. And if you need more information about that, I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. It is it's an easier process than the Form 470, but it does still take a couple of steps to work through. So with that said, what does the Form 470 do? Well, it starts up the process, essentially. The first step, as we covered in last week's training in the E-rate process, is competitive bidding. And the Form 470 starts up that competitive bidding process. There are a couple of critical requirements around the procurement and competitive bidding process. Namely, it needs to be fair and open. We talked about that last week. Fair means that all vendors are treated the same, and open means that the same information is available to all vendors at the same time. It's also critical to remember that the Form 470 supplements but does not supplant any of your local requirements. So, for example, the E-rate program doesn't have requirements around the number of bids that you have to receive. You may have local requirements that, for example, if your procurement is over $25,000, you need to have a minimum of 3 bids. Just because the E-rate does not require you to have 3 bids does not mean that you may not be required to have 3 bids based on your local requirements. Similarly, you may have only a 2-week waiting period for bids under your local procurement requirements. Under the E-rate, you're required to have a minimum of 28 days. In this case, the 28 days would stand, and you would be required to do that minimum of 28 days. If you have questions about any particular local bidding requirements, please don't hesitate to ask. We'll take it at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and log into EPC. And once you log into EPC, you should see something that looks a little bit like that. This is the landing page in EPC for a library system. In this case, we're actually in the training website rather than the full website. It should look more or less identical, but the web address up here at the top is that portal-training address. So that's why that may look a little bit different. You'll also see that our library system does not have a real library system name. Instead, it's named Library System 10036. So that's you'll see that referenced in a couple of places. When you are filing your own application, it would actually get the name of your library or your library system. In this instance, instead, we've just got 10036. So with that said, once you log into Epic, in order to go ahead and file the Form 470, the first thing you need to do is click up here at the top right where it says FCC Form 470. And what that does is that opens up a new tab, and in that new tab, it starts a Form 470. So the first thing it's going to ask us to do is give the application a nickname, and we're going to go ahead and call this MA State Training Fall 2025. Once you've given it a nickname, it also would behoove you to go ahead and just review this information that appears on the left-hand side that I've highlighted. This is the address information for your library. And if the address information, the phone number, the email, if any of those things are incorrect, you're going to want to go ahead and stop what you're doing with the Form 470, go back out into EPC, and update that information in your organization's profile. All right, assuming all of this information is correct, we're going to go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of the page, and we will then hit Save and Continue. Now you'll notice in most instances we have at least a Save and Continue and a Save and Share option down at the bottom of the page. Save and Continue just moves us forward in the application. Save and Share takes the application and shares it out to all users at your library who have the appropriate rights to edit the Form 470. So someone else can come in and start working on the Form 470 at that point. Only one person at a time can be working in the Form 470. So you shouldn't save and share it out unless you are done with your piece of what needs to be done, at least for now. So we're going to go ahead and save and continue to go ahead and move forward through the application. On the next page, it gives us a little bit of information about our library system. Importantly, in this case, we are a library system, but we only have 2 eligible entities. In this particular library system, there is a main branch and a single outlet, and that's it. Which is good enough for our purposes, but in your case, you may have a library system with significantly more outlets, or you may just be an independent library that isn't part of a library system. If that is the case, if you're an independent library, it will just show up as independent library here. If you are part of a library system with more outlets, do make sure that the number of eligible entities listed here matches the number of library outlets, including your main library, that are present in your library system. Below that, it'll indicate the recipients of service, and in this case, it's just my library system. Again, if you're an independent library, it should just list your independent library. If you were a consortium, it would list all of the different members of the consortium here. So with that, let's go ahead and click Save and Continue down at the bottom right to move forward onto the next page of the application. This is where if you have a consultant, it would list who your consultant is. Um, I don't have specific numbers on what percentage of libraries in Massachusetts are using consultants. It's a pretty good percentage of them. For basic stuff that you want to request through the E-rate program, I don't think you really need a consultant. If your application is fairly complex, then you might well want to have a consultant. So I'm happy to talk to you about that. I'm not shilling for your business or anything like that. But if you have a fairly simple application and you just need a little bit of help getting through it, that's part of what I'm here for on behalf of MBLC. The second thing it asks for here is the contact information. And this is for determining who the contact will be associated with this Form 470. Okay, so it's not necessarily going to be the contact who's listed in any RFPs that you have. It's not necessarily going to be the contact for everything, including subsequent forms. It's just for things associated with this Form 470. So if you are the contact, you can go ahead and select yes, and it will go ahead and fill your information in here automatically. Now, this is in the training portal. So my training portal account is very creatively named first name, last name. But if this were a real person or you, it would have your first name, your last name, your email address, and your phone number. If you are not the main contact person, but the main contact is someone else at your library, you can click no, and you can go ahead and look that person up here. Now, it's critical that that person must have an account within EPC and must be affiliated with your library. So I have, for example, a second user who's associated with my library, non-administrator. I know, creative name. But this is the second user account that's associated with this particular entity. And you'll see I've got in a name, first name, last name, email address, and phone number associated with them. So for our purposes today, I'm going to go ahead and select yes, because I am indeed the contact person. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Save and Continue to move forward. Now, I mentioned before that the Form 470 is a little bit different than some of the other forms, and part of the reason for that is that you can include both Category 1 and Category 2 on the same Form 470. You cannot do that on the Form 471. So if you are requesting both Category 1 and Category 2 services, you can get by with doing just a single Form 470, but at the next step in the process where you do the Form 471, you'll have to file multiple Forms 471. In this case, we're going to go ahead and apply for both Category 1 and Category 2. My goal today is to provide some examples that will look as similar to what you do as possible. So we're going to do some Category 1 for an individual, or rather for the library system, reaching into the entire library system for internet access. Then we're also going to do a bookmobile, assuming that the library system has a bookmobile, and see what it takes to apply for internet access for a bookmobile. And then we'll do at least one Category 2 request, depending on how the time is looking at that point. So we're going to go ahead and select Category 1 because we are requesting Category 1 services. We're also going to select Category 2 because we're also selecting Category 2 services. And then we'll go ahead and click Save and Continue. On the next page here, it's asking if we have any RFPs. We talked about it in more detail in the last training. There are some services that require RFPs. The big ones are if you are looking to build your own broadband network, that does require that you put out an RFP and that you compare that self-provisioned broadband service against lit leased fiber options. However, one of the other services that requires you to have an RFP is bookmobile service. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and then I can either drag and drop files into the box that says drop file here, or I can click upload. So I'm going to go ahead and click upload. And look at that. It's already on my desktop, which is perfect. First, I'm going to upload my bookmobile RFP. And then second, you'll see I also have a internal connections RFP that just happens to be sitting on my desktop. So we'll go ahead and upload that one as well. Files that you upload, the RFPs can be in a variety of formats. In this case, they're both Word documents, but you could have uploaded PowerPoints. I'm sorry, you can upload PowerPoints, but you're more likely to want to upload a PDF or an Excel document or a zip file. I typically, if you have an RFP that is made up of multiple documents, I recommend that what you do is you put all of those into a zip file archive and upload the zip file. That makes it easier on service providers. It's also easier on you so that you can keep track of everything that has been uploaded by having it all in one compressed format. So with that, we're going to go ahead and click Save and Continue. And on this next page, it asks if there's any RFP that applies to all of our new requests in either category 1 here on the left or category 2 here on the right. Now you'll recall for category 1, we're going to request services both to the library and also to the bookmobile. So the bookmobile RFP does not apply to all category 1 requests. On the category 2 side, I'm only going to be making requests for services that do fall under the RFP. So I'm going to go ahead and select it for category 2. And you'll see the difference when we get into building the individual funding requests in just a moment. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and click Save and Continue. And that takes us onto the next page in the program, or in the application rather. And it's important to note this particular page that we're getting to first covers category 1 service requests. We're going to get to category 2 after we complete our category 1 requests here. So we've got 2 service requests that I want to do for the library. The first is going to be connectivity to the library itself. And I'm going to say, let's go ahead and request internet access for our library. So I'm going to go ahead and select Add New Service Request. And this then takes us through a series of questions where they are trying to get at what the services are that you're interested in receiving. The problem that you'll run into and that people run into all the time is that these questions can be extremely confusing and often misleading even. USAC has recognized the fact that these questions are perhaps imperfect, would be the way that they would put it. And so they have put together a document called their guiding questions document, which is linked in the slides that I provided to you. So you'll see there's some red text there that provides a direct link to that document. Why is it so important and why did I put the direct link in? Well, USAC has thoughtfully put in a link to their website, but it becomes very difficult to find the guiding questions document on their website. So I figured it was better to just go ahead and provide you with that direct link. So you have that there in the presentation itself. So in this case, we have 2 options at the top level, and you'll see that there are going to be several levels of questions for each funding request. But the first top level question is, are we seeking bids for internet access and or data transmission service, or are we seeking bids for category 1 networking equipment or maintenance and operations? We talked last week a little bit about networking equipment and maintenance and operations and how unlikely it is that that's going to be something you're applying for. So in this case, we are seeking bids for internet access and or data transmission service because we're looking for internet access coming into our main library that will then be shared across a wide area network with the library outlet. Once we select that first option, you'll see that it opens up a whole variety of sub options. These are trying to get at the different ways, the different kinds of services that you might purchase under the E-rate program. So for example, if you're seeking just bids for internet access without data transmission, you would select the second option. If you were looking for data transmission without internet, you would select the third option. If you're looking to build your own network, you'd select the fourth. And if you're looking for wireless internet services delivered with a Wi-Fi hotspot, again, this will be going away for 2026, you would select that bottom option. In our case, we're looking for bids for internet access and data transmission service. In other words, we want the two of them bundled together, whether they're provided by one or multiple providers, and whether they are provided over different kinds of media, meaning different kinds of networks. You could have fiber or coax or telephone wire or satellite or microwave, whatever. We'll go ahead and select that top option because we're looking for internet access coming into our library system. And then here we have our option as to whether we are seeking internet access and data transmission services um, provided by one or more providers, or whether we're seeking air card service for mobile devices. And this latter one is about Bookmobile. So we'll get to that when we do the Bookmobile request in just a moment. But for our internet access for the library system, we'll go ahead and select the top one. And once we've gotten through these three layers of questions, it then asks us a couple of quick questions about the services that we're requesting. First is how many we are requesting, the quantity. And we are only requesting one connection into the library system. The number of entities served is going to be 2 because this is going to be shared across our WAN with our main library and our library outlet. The minimum capacity that we're looking for our purposes today is going to be 500 megabits, and the maximum capacity is going to be 2 gigabits. It will then ask if we're also seeking installation, activation, and configuration for the service. The answer to this question is up to you, but I always recommend that you say yes to it. And the reason is that it may be that you think you're going to end up with your existing service provider, for example, and they're not going to need to do installation, activation, and configuration because the service is already in place. But what happens if it's somebody else and they happen to have an installation fee that's associated with bringing the service to your library, and they need to do initial configuration? There's a fee associated with that. You can't ask for E-rate discounts on those fees unless you've selected this option. So I always strongly recommend that people select the yes box here for installation, activation, and initial configuration. Next, you'll see that there is a series of options here where we can select any RFPs that apply to this service request. In this case, neither RFP applies. We're not talking about the Bookmobile yet. We're not talking about the internal connections yet. So we're going to leave these two unchecked, and then we'll just click Save Request. And all of a sudden, we're back out here where we started on the services requests for Category 1 services. But you'll see that it's now created a service request here in this table where it's asking for data transmission and or internet access service at 500 megabits to 2 gigabits, serving 2 entities, a single connection. Boom. That's all the information that came out of all of those drop downs and all of those options that we selected. It just basically populates this one line in this table. So keeping that in mind, let's go ahead and do another one. Let's do one for the Bookmobile real quickly. So we'll click Add New Service Request. We're seeking internet access and or data transmission. And we're seeking it based over any combination of transmission media, again, for internet access and data transmission bundled together. And then we're going to select the bottom option here, which indicates that we are seeking commercial wireless service for a school or library that does not have an existing broadband internal connection. And the specific example that they give here is for use on a library Bookmobile without a fixed connection. Now you might ask, well, why the heck would a library Bookmobile have a fixed connection? And that is a very good question. The reason that they have this option in here is that they are trying to filter out schools and libraries who were using mobile service, hotspot type services within their library or within their school, rather than improving the quality of their own network internally at the library or school, because it's more cost effective for the program if they actually improve the quality of the connection in their library or school rather than having this mobile service funded. Which all makes perfect sense, except then you throw in a Bookmobile. And by definition, non-mobile service to a Bookmobile doesn't make any sense because the bookmobile itself is mobile. So we are fortunate that they have explicitly carved out the bookmobile example here as the kind of entity that would be purchasing this service. All right, so you'll see here they have in this red text this warning where if you are seeking a cellular service for on-premise use, you must prove that it's the most cost-effective way of providing the services to that entity. And that includes services provided to a bookmobile. So how do you do that? Well, you do that through putting out an RFP. And so you'll see when we get down there that we have a bookmobile RFP that is available. And if you are interested, let me know and I will send you a copy of the template for a bookmobile RFP. It's very simple. We're also hoping to have that up on the MBLC website fairly soon if it's not there already. So again, we're seeking a single connection for our bookmobile. In this case, it's only serving one entity, the bookmobile entity. We are seeking installation and activation. In terms of the speeds, you can request whatever you want for speeds, but typically the services that you receive over cellular connections are a little bit slower speed than what you would get over, say, like fiber. So in this case, I'm going to say minimum capacity of 10 megabits, maximum capacity of 500 megabits. So that's what we're looking for. And then when we get to this last question about any RFPs that apply, I'm going to go ahead and check the box that says RFP Bookmobile Connectivity. That's the RFP that I uploaded earlier that covers the bookmobile. Okay. So I'll then go ahead and save that request. And if we scroll up the page here on the page that comes up, you'll see that we now also have a second funding request asking for information about our bookmobile request. Now down here we have a narrative section where we can indicate additional information about the services that we're seeking. So in this case, I'm going to say that I'm seeking internet access for library system at 500 megabits to 2 gigabits per second. And then importantly, I'm going to say that proposals must be received no later than, let's say, 3 p.m. on November 15th, 2025. You are not required to put a due date in for bids to come into you. I have found it is extremely helpful if you do provide that deadline because it gives vendors a deadline to work against. Whereas otherwise, vendors often, if they don't know when your bids are due, they put them off. And you don't want vendors to put off bidding. You want vendors to get their bids into you in a timely fashion so that you can then review those bids, go through the evaluation process and whatnot before you file your Form 471. The second service that we're seeking is the bookmobile service. So I'm going to say seeking mobile internet access for bookmobile. Then instead of providing any other details, I'm going to say see RFP for details. Why? Because all of the details associated with the bookmobile service should be in that RFP document. And so the due date and how to submit bids and where to submit bids, all that information should be in the RFP. And so I'm going to direct them to the RFP. Now, notably, the RFP only applies to the bookmobile request. So that's why for the service going to the library system, we're specifying a due date here. For the bookmobile, we're not specifying the due date. We're saying see the RFP because all the information's in the RFP. Relatively straightforward, I hope. The last question we have to answer for Category 1 services is whether we are seeking an installment payment plan. This has to do mostly with whether you are seeking to have a network built out to your library, either a network that is going to be a commercially available network, so you're going to have, the phone company, the cable company, or a broadband provider build out their existing network to encompass your location, or you're going to build out your own network. In either case, you may have what are called special construction charges, which are the big capital expenses, essentially. And the question is whether you're seeking an installment payment plan related to those charges. If you say yes, it will ask you over how many years you want to amortize the cost and whether you prefer monthly or annual payments. In this case, we're not looking to have any kind of major capital expenses thrown into building out this network, so we're going to say no, and then we can go ahead and move on. So we move on to the next page, and oh my God, it looks almost like we've just lost all of the information that we put in about the service requests. But we haven't. What we've done is we've moved on to category 2. The page looks almost exactly the same. The big difference is up here, it now says 2 for category 2. So for category 2, in this case, I've got an RFP that we've attached to the application. And as you'll recall, it automatically attaches, we told it that all of the category 2 requests are going to be covered under this RFP. And so as we fill out the service requests, we'll see that it actually automatically includes the RFP, which is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fill this out, and let's say that we're seeking, let's start with, well, let's do wireless access points and let's do switches. So we'll do 2 separate requests. Looks like we've got enough time to cover 2. I'm going to go ahead and click Add a New Service. And the first service that I'm seeking is going to be wireless access points for my network. And so just like we had with category 1, there are going to be a series of questions that sort of cascade, and depending on what you answer in one question, it's going to impact what options you have for the subsequent questions. I would again refer you to the guiding statements document that is on the USAC website, because this will help you figure out what the appropriate answers are. In this case, the top question they're asking here is, which of the 3 buckets under category 2 does your request fall into? Is it internal connections, which is the top one, basic maintenance of internal connections, which is the second one, or the management of internal broadband services, which is the third one? We went through the definitions of all of these during last week's training, so I'm not going to belabor it again today. But in our particular instance, we are going to be seeking internal connections and the basic maintenance of internal connections associated with our wireless access points. So I'm going to go ahead and start by just selecting internal connections up here at the top. And it then says we're seeking internal connections. What function are we seeking? And by function, they just mean what kind of internal connection is it? And in this case, we're seeking wireless access points. So when I click on the functions dropdown, it brings up this menu, and I'm going to select wireless access points and necessary software and licenses. Now you'll note they've included the software and licenses here, which is great. So we don't need to have a separate request for software and licenses. We can now request both the access points and the software and licenses under the same single request. So that's great. So I don't want to endorse any particular manufacturer, but I am going to show sort of how you select a manufacturer. So let's say that we're a Juniper shop at the library, meaning that all of our networking equipment is Juniper, and we want to continue using Juniper, and that's our preferred provider. Under manufacturer, I would go ahead and click the drop down, and I can scroll through all of these until I find Juniper, and I'm going to go ahead and select Juniper. Over here on the left, it's going to ask for the quantity, and this is the number of wireless access points that I'm seeking. Now, this is across my 2 library outlets, so I'm going to say I'm seeking 5 wireless access points. There isn't a requirement here that you can only have X number of access points or X number of switches per library outlet. They leave that up to your discretion to determine what best meets your needs, and that's part of your needs assessment or your pre-procurement evaluation of what your needs are. So I'm looking for 5 wireless access points. I'm also seeking installation, activation, and initial configuration for the service, just like we did on category 1. Now, it may be with category 2 that you actually don't want the service provider to do that because you have your own technical staff who will take care of it for you. If you're a larger library system, that is almost certainly the case, and you would probably indicate no. If, on the other hand, you're looking for a service provider who will actually come in and help you set it up, you would go ahead and select yes. I want to point out that I have not selected the RFP here, but because we've indicated already that all of the funding requests under Category 2 will fall under this RFP, the RFP has already been auto-selected. Now, if that is a mistake and you decide that you need to request something that doesn't get covered under the RFP, you can always uncheck the box. But by default, it will be checked because we told it earlier on when we uploaded the RFP that all of the requests in Category 2 were going to be covered under the RFP. The most important thing here, and if you pull nothing from today's training other than this, the most important thing is to remember that for most network equipment nowadays, there are licenses that are attached to those. And the licenses are a weird amalgamation in E-rate terms of both internal connections, which would be right of use licenses, and the basic maintenance of internal connections, which would be any kind of maintenance or software update license. Because of that, you want to be sure that you request services under both internal connections and the basic maintenance of internal connections. And one of the neat things that USAC has done in the last couple of years is they've made that very easy. So you'll recall when we were up here at the top and putting the requests together, starting to answer those questions, I went ahead and selected internal connections. Now we could go back out once this is done and complete another identical request, but do it under basic maintenance of internal connections. But in this case, instead, at the bottom left, I can just check this box that says select this option if you would like to create an accompanying Category 2 basic maintenance of internal connections request for this internal connections request. I check that, and it goes ahead and it pre-populates all of the information here based on what we've put up above. The only thing I need to indicate is the number of entities served, which in this case is 2, my main library and my outlet. And then I can click Save Request. And when I come back out here to the service requests, you'll see that it went ahead and it created 2 separate service requests, one for internal connections and then one for the basic maintenance of internal connections. It's really, really important that you don't forget to include those basic maintenance of internal connections options here. Why is that? Because you can't get full funding for the license if there's a basic maintenance component and you haven't put basic maintenance of internal connections on your Form 470. So my advice to you is going to be anytime you are purchasing any Category 2 equipment and there might be a license associated with it, make sure that you have not only included the internal connections request, which includes any components of the license that fall under internal connections, but also include a basic maintenance request. All right, so let's do that same thing again. This time, let's go ahead and do it for switches rather than for wireless access points. So I clicked Add a new service request. I'm going to say I seek bids for the equipment. Under internal connections, when I select the dropdown under function, I then have my options here to select the kind of equipment that we're looking for. I'm looking for switches this time. Let's say I'm looking for 2 switches, one for each library. Again, I'm a Juniper shop in this particular instance. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not endorsing any particular brand. I'm just want to show you what you might want to select based on whatever your preferred brand is at your library. So you might be a Juniper shop, you might be a Cisco shop, you might be a Netgear shop. Select what works best for you. And then again, whether or not we're seeking installation, activation, and configuration is a decision that you guys get to make. For Category 1, I always suggest the answer is yes. For Category 2, it's really about whether you need somebody else to come in and set it up for you or whether your own technical staff will take care of that. And again, we're going to go ahead and just select the box to add a basic maintenance of internal connections request to the internal connections request that we did up above. It pre-populates all of the information. Again, all I need to do is select the number of entities and click Save Request. And you'll see now that it has added 2 additional requests, one for the internal connections of the switches and one for the basic maintenance of the switches. Okay. hopefully that's relatively straightforward. I have a couple of additional examples in the slides that just sort of walk you through how all of those work, but it's more or less a rinse and repeat of the information that I've provided here. So if you have questions about how to request any of these, let's go ahead and save that then for the Q&A session, which will follow. Just like we had in the category 1 section, we have a narrative section here where we can add any additional information. In this case, I'm just going to say CRFP for additional information and just leave it at that because we're going to ideally have all of that information in our RFP document. So we'll go ahead and click Save and Continue, and that gets us out of our service requests. The next question they ask is whether you have a technical contact person who can answer questions about the services that you've sought. Now, it's up to you as to whether you ever want to provide a technical contact. My advice is that you typically do not want to provide technical contact. Why? The simple reason, as we discussed during last week's training, is that you need to make sure that all vendors are treated equally and they're all given the same information. That means that you need to control that information pretty closely and make sure that it is only put out via official channels. So for example, in the RFP, you're likely to have a Q&A round somewhere in your RFP where vendors have a formalized way in which they can submit questions. You have a formalized way in which you will take all of the questions, write responses, and then publish those responses. And that information is available to all of the vendors. So you've preserved the integrity of the RFP and the procurement. If you have a technical contact who is providing answers on sort of a willy-nilly catch-as-catch-can basis to different vendors, you can't control that process. And so that's why I typically say that say no, I don't have a technical contact person for the RFP. That's how I usually do it with my clients. If you, on the other hand, have a technical person who will answer the questions and will maintain the integrity of that procurement process, and you have a way to make sure that all the answers get out to all the vendors, I'm not quite sure how that would work, but you might. You can go ahead and click yes, and then you can either search the Epic system to find that person. So let's say our non-administrator was our technical contact. We could do that. Or unlike the contact where the person had to have an account within Epic, we can also enter the details manually and we can put in the first name, last name, phone number, and email for whoever that technical contact is going to be. And they don't have to have an account in Epic. We just need to fill in this information. And that will then get published along with our Form 470 so that people can reach out to that person. Again, my advice is that you just click no. So either way, our next step, we'll click Save and Continue, and I promise we're almost done clicking Save and Continue. We have a couple screens left. The next screen, they ask if there are any state and local procurement requirements. Now, you may or may not have state and local procurement requirements. It's going to depend on your library and what the state requirements are. And honestly, I don't know that Massachusetts has a whole lot of state requirements, but I could be wrong. In this case, I'm going to say, yes, I do have state and local procurement requirements. And they ask here that you either outline them or provide a link to them or how a vendor can contact you about those procurement requirements. In this case, I'm going to assume that all of my procurement requirements are outlined in the RFP, or the RFPs rather, one for the bookmobile and one for category 2. So I'm going to go ahead and just say CRFP. If, on the other hand, you have a web page on your library site or on the township that your library is associated with on their site that provides all of this information, you could just provide a link to that here. All right. So our next step is going to be, instead of clicking Save and Continue, clicking Review FCC Form 470. We're getting close to the end. And once we click Review FCC Form 470, we get this page up, which is not very helpful. And the reason I say that, this is very distinctly an older school kind of approach in web development, um, where rather than them doing the task and then having it automatically pop up for you, they're doing a task. In this case, they're generating a PDF version of your Form 470 and running some checks on it. But they're not going to tell you when that is ready. Instead, what they tell you is that when it becomes ready, a task will become available to complete the certification. Okay, not terribly helpful. Where are the tasks? Well, as it turns out, tasks are just up here at the top left of the page. So I'm going to go ahead and click tasks. And I took long enough describing what was on the last page that it's already finished generating the task. So that's great. We're going to go ahead then and click on the task where it says Certify FCC Form 470. We'll open that up. And you'll see now that it looks very similar to the page that we had before, except we've got a document link and then a checkbox that we need to check. So first, let's open the document link. And what you'll see is it downloads a PDF, which when I open that PDF, it has all of the information that we have been going through for the last 35 minutes or so. It's all condensed into 2 pages, which is great. Gives you something relatively short that you can go ahead and review and figure out if this is the correct information. In this case, we're going to go ahead and say that this all looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the tab where we had the application come up. We've downloaded the document, we've looked at it, it all looks good. Because it all looks good, I can go ahead and check the box here, which is where I'm certifying that all the information is correct. And then I can click the Continue to Certification button. When you do that, it takes you directly into the certifications. And it makes it sound like your Form 470 has been filed at this point and you just need to complete the certifications. The truth of the matter is, if you need to, you can always go down to the bottom and click back, and it will take you back into the form, and you can click edit here, and that will take you all the way back to the very beginning of the form, and you can walk through anything you need to change. Okay, so you're not locked in until you've actually completed and submitted all the certifications. So check the box and click continue again, and we're back in the certifications. Now, I'm not going to read all the certifications to you today. You're capable of doing that for yourself. What I am going to say is that these certifications are probably the single most important piece of what we are going to be filing today on the Form 470. And the reason they're so important is because these are what the FCC or an auditor or a law enforcement agency uses to confirm your compliance with the requirements of the program. There are several places where you are confirming that you are compliant with particular program rules, and other instances where you just say you followed all of the program rules and you're admitting here that you understand that failure to comply with those program rules can lead to civil or criminal prosecution and penalties, including fine, forfeiture, and prison. So it's very important that you take the time to read these certifications and that you understand what the certifications say. And if you have questions about them, we can go ahead and talk about it further after the presentation. So you need to go through and select all of the certifications that are here. Again, most of them are acknowledging that you have to comply with the various program rules. And once you've selected all the certifications, you can scroll all the way down to the bottom and you can click the Certify button. And you'll see the Certify button isn't showing up. It's not working for me. It's because I haven't selected all of the certifications. So if I select all of the certifications, the Certify button turns blue and we can then click it. That brings up a pop-up in which we are indicating we understand that it can result in civil or criminal liability. And that when you electronically certify this form, it's the equivalent of having done so with an ink signature. So we'll go ahead and click yes. And the incredibly anticlimactic end to the filing of the Form 470 is that you just get a page where it says, hey, you have no more tasks that you need to do. Congratulations. This is actually not the end of what we need to do, however. In addition to having filed the Form 470, you're going to want to make sure that you have proof that you filed the Form 470 as well as a copy of that Form 470 in your records. USAC doesn't really tell you how to do this, so I've included a little bit of a walkthrough in the slides. The first thing to do is just go ahead and click on News up here at the top left. And what it will tell you is that the top news item will be associated with with the Form 470 that you have funded. There are a couple of critical things here. It has your allowable contract date. That's the earliest date on which you can close the bidding, evaluate the bids, select a winning vendor, and sign a contract. It also has information about what you need to do if there are errors on your application, etc. So you're going to want to keep a copy of this in your files. The easiest way to do that is to scroll down until you get to this sort of grayed out text down here at the bottom, which will have the nickname that you assigned to your Form 470 listed. So remember, we assigned the nickname MA State Training Fall 2025. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And this brings us up, and you'll see that it's a copy of all of the information on the application that we were looking at before. There are two things we're going to want to do here. One is we're going to want to save a copy of the Form 470 itself. So if we click on Generated Documents, you'll see that there's an original version of the Form 470. We click on that, and it downloads a PDF. And this looks just like the PDF that we reviewed earlier, only in addition to the information that it had on the first 2 pages, which sort of summarized all of the application information, you'll see now that it also includes all the certifications here, and and the information about who certified and what time it was certified. Okay, so we have confirmation. You want to save this in your files. And the reason you want to save this in your files is so that you have that proof of certification going forward. The other thing that you're going to want to do is get a copy of that notification letter that we saw in News. And so we can click on News here, and it'll just show us the news that is associated with this application. What I recommend you do is go ahead and click on More so that it displays all the information and more info. And so we have everything here listed in one place. And then I recommend you just print this to a PDF and save it in your files. Once you've done that, then you're done with the Form 470 and you're ready to go ahead and move on. So with that said, let me go ahead and go through the slides. Okay. And this is where we save the copy of the form that we just covered. And so let's go ahead and finish things off for today. So we've got upcoming trainings coming up. There'll be about a month or so before the next training where we'll talk about bid evaluation and vendor selection. And then subsequent trainings, we'll talk about the Form 471, the PIA review, the Form 46, and invoicing. As always, if you have questions, feel free to direct them to me. You can also direct them to the MBLC E-rate mailing list, or you can ask them of USAC, the administrator of the program. You can do that either through their 888 toll-free number or through the EPC portal. As always, we want you to take advantage of E-rate if it can help you. E-rate is a tremendous opportunity. It can save you a lot of money. And so it may be very beneficial for your library to be involved. And last but not least, I would just say if there are other topics beyond the ones that are at the top of this slide that you'd like to see covered, please let us know what those topics are. We are looking for suggestions as to what you'd like to see in the training. And if you like or don't like this different training format where we're doing the sort of shorter, more frequent trainings, please let us know that as well. So with that, Kate, if you could go ahead and stop the recording, we'll go ahead